I've already presented.
Well, I can't do it based on everything you presented because you keep going back to the Bible, and I'm not doing it from there. But yeah, this is why I raised that question at the end. Is this assertion that it's impossible to get from the things that we experience to then conceiving of a God. And the primary contention here that he raises is that we can't conceive of an infinite, and there's no infinite in nature. Although we could draw a circle and understand endless, never ending. That's not identical to infinite. But I see no problem with this idea of reasoning by comparison. As a matter of fact, I think that's how we pretty much do everything. We'll probably talk about that a little bit with morality.
All right,
I understand for myself and my capabilities, and I see some other animal with other capabilities. Imagination is what allows me to say, what would it be like if I could run like a cheetah? What would it be like if I could fly like a bird? And these extended capabilities, well, I guess could lead us to the action.
Turned 38 years today, bro. 38 years. And what am I doing today? Not a motherfucking thing. I ain't got shit planned. I'm gonna sit my ass right here in the house and just like any other day. Except I sit in the knowledge and gratitude that I went around the sun 38 times so far. That's good enough for me. So, motherfucking Gemini season is officially in effect. A couple more years, literally a couple more years, I'll be in that 40-40 club, bruh. 40-40.
Blue and red Superman, although I think he violates the laws of physics. But it's not, I don't even see this as a difficulty. Imagination is what we use when our brain thinks about things and examines possibilities. I have never, I didn't have a problem with the idea that everything we produce in our brain is actually a cobbling together of other ideas. I'm okay with that because I think that seems to be roughly the way we learn and the way we work. I don't know that it's necessarily impossible for us to come up with something out of whole cloth. But I'm okay with the idea that we experience things, but we extrapolate from there. That's how we get to Superman. Now, what about God? Well, first of all, I was talking about gods to begin with, because there's lots of proposed gods, and they're not all infinite. And we would probably agree, I don't know, I thought we would agree that men created them, but if men are incapable of creating, are men incapable of creating gods or the God? You
need the God first
to get to gods.
And create God.
Yeah, and I reject that as flatly false. I don't need the God in order to get to gods, because not all gods are infinite. Not all gods. Some gods have very limited human failings. They are nothing more than superhumans. The Greek pantheon of gods were not infinite beings. They were nothing that was impossible to conceive of. And I'd argue that we don't need for there to be a God or even a concept of the God for us to be able to reason from, here's my capabilities, hey, this can fly, what would it be like if I could fly? What would it be like if I could move really fast, faster than anybody else? To think about these possibilities, it's how we end up with Star Trek and faster than light travel and the idea of time machines. We don't even know if that's possible or impossible. And I don't know why I raised it twice in one discussion, but it's obviously on my mind. This is what imagination is. Imagination is taking the possible and extrapolating it, or taking the existent and extrapolating it to see what might be possible, what might be conceivable. And this is how we learn more about the universe.
You know you're getting old when your nose hairs grow so long, they actually come out of your nose. Like, I swear, sometimes I be breathing, I can feel the fucking nose hair, like, flapping in and out my fucking nostril. I know that nose hairs are important. They help keep larger particles of dust and debris out of your nasal cavity. I get it. But why does the inside of your nose gotta be so tickly? That's the part I don't get. And then when you start plucking for it, then motherfuckers think you picking boogers and shit out your nose. It's like this, it's a fucking hair. It's like an eyelash, but in your nose. That's something else I always wondered about hair. Like, how does your genetics know to make your eyebrows and your eyelashes grow only a certain length when your beard and mustache and the hair in your head can grow really long, but hair on certain parts of your body doesn't? You know? If we were all monkeys and we were all covered in hair one time, and through evolution we started to lose body hair due to climatical changes in the environment, and so wouldn't we just lose hair all over our body and not just keep hair on our head and a little bit of hair on our face? I'm just thinking out loud here, people. So I had art class yesterday, and the kids didn't eat all the snacks. So I got a bunch of donuts and Capri Sun pouches, and I'm a fucking pig out on these shits. I've always thought about that, bro. Got the Capri Suns. But yeah, you just get hair like on certain parts of your face. And then the hair on, and then like I say, man, some motherfuckers can grow a big ass beard. Their beard grow all the way long down like Methuselah. But then your eyebrows only just grow like so long. How come you don't have to get your eyebrows cut like your hair or you trim it like your beard? Some guys do grow really bushy eyebrows, but it's not like a beard on their fucking eye. Alright, 2 Capri Suns down, 22 to go. So no.
Because we get these neat ideas of, hey, this might be possible. Let's see if it is possible. The Wright brothers, what was it like to fly? Well, we can't do it by flapping. We tried that. The videos are hilarious. But maybe there's some other way that we can achieve something similar. And imagination is what drives that process of discovery. We didn't need a concept of a plane to be implanted in reality in order to then invent a plane from our imagination. It is a cobbling together of the other ideas. And I don't see why you...
I'm the same way, bro. Like, my shit just will not grow. I haven't shaved in fucking a month, and that's all I get is like this little patch of short, stubby cat whiskers. And this shit right here just grows like that naturally. My sideburns don't come down and connect or nothing. And then like my mustache kind of want to come down and connect, but you still got like these 2 inches where it's like, it's not in the genetics for you, buddy. Like, you don't get a lot of facial hair. And I wish I could grow a full beard. I'd probably rock a full beard if I could grow that shit, but just wasn't in the cards for your boy. Like, fuck it. Even my dreads, yo, my dreads haven't, my hair on my head stopped growing like a couple years ago. But you look at pictures of me from like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, like my dreads are just like the same length. Them shit just stopped growing. Like my eyebrows.
To draw a hard line in our ability to extrapolate at a God.
want to just take a few minutes to say something about time travel, and then I'll ask my next question.
Okay.
Time travel is not possible because in order for time travel to be possible, we would need to be able to travel faster than the speed of light. According to the theory of relativity, E equals mc squared, if it is possible to travel faster than the speed of light, then time can literally come to a stop. And the faster you travel beyond the speed of light, theoretically, you should be able to reverse time. And since there is a universal speed limit, which was discovered, hinted at first by Newton and then discovered by Albert Einstein, and I might add that Albert Einstein figured these things out not through what we would say is conventional science, but through pure theoretical reasoning. He developed some very major concepts, and that's why we cannot time travel. Until we can break the speed of light, then we can really think about traveling in time. But my next question is, you mentioned about methods of interpretation. Do you believe that there is a method of interpretation for language, or is it a free-for-all in deciding how language works, how language means? If you write a letter to your wife, does she have to have some kind of structure of interpretation that both you and she understand in order for communication to exist?
Sure, on time travel, I didn't know we proved it impossible because there are other theories like wormholes and stuff that would violate this cosmic speed limit, which is why we're still talking about it. But with regard to language, it's not a free-for-all in the sense that sometimes been implied. To answer the question directly, yes, in order for my wife and I to carry on a conversation using language, we must have the same or similar understanding of the actual grammatical rules of language and how words are used. But that's all that's required, because as I mentioned last night, language is a tool. It's a tool to communicate concepts, and as long as we share the same concepts and the same understandings, then Beth and I can communicate. And it doesn't matter whether somebody else uses those concepts and those basically we're talking about phonemes in another way. I mean, that's why we have different languages. There are words that in other languages that are used fairly commonly that would be very offensive in ours. They're the same phonemes, they have different meanings. And the only thing that's important is that the individuals using them share a common understanding. We can discuss where we have a disagreement about a term, and the usage of words changes. Bad does not mean what bad meant, and neither does gay, and a number of other things. The usage of words changes, language changes over time. Yes, we have to have a similar concept, but that doesn't mean that words have meaning. You mentioned this yesterday, that words have meaning, and you seem to imply that this meaning is intrinsic to them. And I find that just flatly false. A collection of letters, a grouping of phonemes, doesn't have an intrinsic meaning. It has a meaning that we imbue from it, that we put in it, and it has the shared understanding of that word is what gives it value. It's like saying that XJR395 has some intrinsic meaning. It doesn't. But if you and I agree that this is the model number of a particular car, now it is a pointer to a concept, as we would talk about in computer language. It's a pointer to a concept. It doesn't have an intrinsic meaning unto itself.
129.
I'll give him an extra 10 seconds. I had that left over.
I just want to take a few moments to respond to that, because as we think about the philosophy of language, and this gets into some very deep areas of thinking. You can go all the way back to Plato's Dialogues, Thrasymachus, and an entire philosophy of language that was constructed through that dialogue as they began to think about what language is and what is its function and whether words have meanings or not. And so back in the 4th and 5th centuries BC, they were already discussing these things. But remember, our basis goes all the way back to the Bible. When God created Adam and placed him in the garden, he gave him the task, the Herculean task of naming the animals. And so there we understand that when God created the human being, he gave him the power to understand something about language. In Genesis chapter 11, we can read there about the Tower of Babel and how the whole earth was of one language and spoke, had one word and one language, is what the Bible there reads. And then at that moment, there was a division of the languages. I can't finish the concept, but basically, language is something that we can understand how meaning derives. And if you want a very thought-provoking discussion, then ask the question, what came first, a thought or a word?
And that's another parable in the Bible, in the Old Testament. I love the fucking Old Testament. I really haven't read much of the New Testament other than what has been preached to me in churches with the whole Jesus thing, and you know, having disciples and raising people from the dead and working miracles, watering the wine, feeding 1,000 people with one fish and walking on water and all this other shit, man. But the Old Testament is fucking crazy, yo. And I lost my point that fast. There was something about what this dude just said, yo. The first thing I just caught his like, Adam was given the Herculean task of naming all the animals, which means that there was an intrinsic value to language. But then you say a Herculean, and that's another demigod. Like you're using the names of other gods to describe what's going on in your god saga.
I can't finish the concept, but basically, language is something that is what the Bible, in Genesis chapter 11,
the Tower of Babel is what he spoke on. And I was going to ask you guys, what are your thoughts about the Tower of Babel, if you know that story from, Genesis 2nd chapter, 3rd chapter, whatever. Some people say that the Tower of Babel or the Tower of Nimrod. But like he just gave a really quick synopsis of the story, and that's all it is just like a chapter, you know what I'm saying? A couple verses about this shit where mankind attempted to build a tower so high that it would reach the heavens, and God saw that anything man chose to do, he would achieve. He wouldn't be able to be stopped from doing anything he wanted to accomplish. And for some reason, God thought that was wrong. Y'all are amazing. Look at what you're doing. You're building towers and everyone is organized and unified and you're working together and everyone speaks the same language. I don't like that shit. I'm gonna smash your tower and then I'm gonna spread you all across the earth and confuse everybody's tongue so that y'all can no longer organize or work together. That shit just don't seem right. And then you God, all knowing, all seeing, all powerful. You know they were gonna do that. Oh, free will. But if you know they got free will, then you still should know what's gonna happen. But the old God in the Old Testament just seemed to mess up time after time after time, and so you had to kick Adam and Eve out because they ain't listen to you. Then you had to kick Cain out because he want to murder motherfuckers. And then Nimrod, who was a mighty warrior in opposition to God. And you want to smash his tower and confuse all the tongues. And then you want to put Tubal-Cain, against Noah, and then you wipe out everybody again, and the Nephilim and all. Like you just didn't see any of this coming. Not even the Nephilim, the giants. And it's like, dang God, like what did you know? Is this your plan? And so since you know everything, this must be a part of your grand master scheme, your end game. And then after all of this, after resetting the world over and over and fucking up, after all that, then you still gotta bring Jesus. You still gotta bring Jesus. Like Moses and everybody, y'all motherfucking, you work miracles in Egypt. You part the motherfucking sea and a tower, a pillar of flame by night and a pillar of clouds by the daytime. And then these motherfuckers still go worship other gods. They still, like, how you keep messing up? But that's the Bible for you. I don't know, man. If a God spoke to our leader and told him he was going to rescue us out of slavery and part the waters, this motherfucker separated the waters until dry land appeared so that we can have an escape route. And then, in the wilderness with no food, magical manna came from the heavens to feed us. And then we following a pillar of fire. What else you need to believe? But even God gave all them signs, and then the motherfuckers still worship a bull. Like, God, what is wrong with you? How come your people won't listen to you? But you already knew that was going to happen because you're God, right? I don't get it. If God knew all that stuff was going to happen, then why? What is it for? That's the great mystery in life. What does life mean? What's the purpose of life? The purpose of life is to be God's plaything, because he knows what's going to happen, but he going to let everything fuck up anyway. And you jump back out at the end like, ha, it was just a joke. I was just joking with y'all. Rapture, motherfuckers.
I can read there about the Tower of Babel and how the whole earth was of one language and spoke, had one word and one language is what the Bible there reads. And then at that moment there was a division of the languages. I can't finish the concept, but basically language is something that we can understand how meaning derives, and if you want a very thought-provoking discussion, then ask the question, what came first, a thought or a word?
Thought. I'll save you the time. That was my 10 seconds.
Yeah, the question is, whose thought? All right, so this is our question session, so remember, ask the question in a clear, terse manner, trying to get as many questions as possible, from one side to another. Raise up your hand if any questions will come to you, and once again, be respectful as you're asking these questions. Right?
Sure, I answered this partly last night, and I will admit that it's a bit of a dodge, because I recognize that it would be arrogant of me to think that I could tell the difference, which is something I'll probably talk about more tomorrow night. What am I looking for as far as evidence? I can't give you specifics, but what I can give you, and last night I mentioned that if there is a God, it should know exactly what evidence would convince me, and it should be capable of producing it, and it hasn't so far, or maybe I've been stubborn, was the thing that came up. I don't like to give glib answers like, a writing in the sky that everybody can read. But I would say that either a God exists or it doesn't. This is just the only two options. And if a God exists, it either interacts in reality in some detectable way, or it doesn't. Those are the only two options there, and they're direct negations. If it doesn't interact in reality in any detectable way, it is logically indistinguishable from the God that doesn't exist. So if we're going to be talking about a God that we can actually detect, that could present some evidence, it needs to be a God that manifests in reality, and in many religions, in many versions that we're talking about. I don't need something amazing. I just need a little bit. I need something more than this book says so, and this book is consistent with reality, or this book hasn't been proved false yet, because that's a shifting of the burden of proof. I'm a little irritated at the idea of a God who is finicky about how much evidence and what quality of evidence he provides to different people. So that Saul gets a Damascus Road appearance, and the ancient Israelites get pillars of fire and cloud and fed manna from heaven and witnessed to many miracles, even though seemingly they turn their back on that God right away, which is something that I just don't even think is realistic. I mean, if you were in a foreign country and you prayed and a ball of light showed up, you're with your wife who's pregnant and about to deliver, and a ball of light shows up, leads you to a car that's got keys in it, and the ball of light leads you down a road, the cars get out of your way, and you get all the way to hospital. There's nothing. I don't think any reasonable person would ever not believe that that was God, or not believe that that God existed. And certainly I don't think a reasonable person would say, the heck with that God, what's he done for me lately? Let me just go ahead and invent a new God out of whole cloth. I'm not asking for that type of evidence necessarily, but what I get, I don't get anything from God that I'm aware of, but what I get from apologists quite frequently is, look at the trees, look at the world, the fact that you're standing here, these things that seem intuitive. I fully admit, it seems intuitively correct, and God seems like an amazing answer, and I don't see that God is an explanation for anything. And so when people point to evidence, I wouldn't say there's no evidence, because, okay, we've got anecdotal evidence, we've got testimonial evidence. I don't have a good reason to think that testimonial evidence is reliable. And furthermore, as I'll probably repeat tomorrow, I find that a God who is so fickle about who's going to get evidence and who's going to get what kind of evidence, that showed favoritism towards Israelites or Saul or whatever, and that then would punish someone for honestly exercising their intellect and saying, this is not sufficient. This appeal to there must have been a first cause and therefore blah, 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 Jesus. Or the various arguments from ignorance that we have of you haven't proved this wrong, so it's right. Any God that would punish anybody for being intellectually honest is immoral. And while I can't prove to anybody that I have been an honest seeker, the question came up yesterday, it may be that I'm just too stubborn. I can't prove that to anybody else. If there is a God, he'll know how sincere I was or wasn't. And, I guess we could deal with that at that time, but, I know people who are less sincere, who seem to have been granted evidences that the rest of us just don't get. So I can't give you a specific, but I think God knows, and I'm still waiting. Well, I don't know, but so let me restate the question. He was referring to when I talked about David Hume, and David Hume basically says, if somebody tells me that a man was raised from the dead, I have to consider which of these three possibilities is most likely, that the individual relaying this information to me has been deceived, is attempting to deceive, or that the event actually happened. Those are the three possibilities that you consider. It doesn't mean that the third possibility is actually factually possible in reality. For example, it may be impossible for you to flap your wings and fly. But if you tell me you can flap your wings and fly, I have to consider, is he deceived? Is he attempting to deceive me? Or is this actually possible? And what Hume tells us, this is very important, reject the greater miracle. He doesn't say accept the lesser miracle, because that presumes that you've considered all possibilities. There may be possibilities you haven't considered. He's not telling you what to accept. Given 3 or 4 possible explanations for this, accept the one that is least extraordinary. He's saying reject the one that is the most extraordinary. And this is the path to making sure that your positions are most likely founded in reason. It's not an assertion that this one that is least likely is necessarily untrue. This goes back to extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. If you tell me you've got a pet dog, okay. You tell me you got a pet dragon, well, now we're in a different ballpark. If you tell me that aliens spirited you away and took you back in time and you witnessed the resurrection so that you are an eyewitness, okay, now we've got a really big claim. And it could be the case that it happened. I can't say that it didn't. Although time travel is impossible. It could be the case that you are deceived, and it could be the case that you are attempting to deceive me. I tend not to assume that people are trying to deceive me. I tend to assume that they're deceived, and that comes across as kind of insulting, and actually I prefer to phrase it as mistaken. It's like when conspiracy theorists talk about things, like we heard about Zeitgeist, the film today, which is garbage. I'll say it again from here. They take disparate facts and they weave together a model, a story that seems compelling. And when you consider that, the failing that they tend to make is that they assume intent rather than incompetence. That this happened, is it more likely that this was a mistake that somebody made, or are they actually involved in this massive conspiracy to deceive you? And I think it's a mistake to assume conspiracy when mistakes and incompetence are everywhere. I mean, they're rampant. We both made mistakes tonight. I probably made more than he has. So that's the thing on Hume. Sure. So the question was, I keep saying I don't know, and that sounds so much closer to agnostic than atheist. So let me clear this up. I keep hitting that mic. I'm waving my arms. Agnostic and atheist aren't mutually exclusive. The way I use the terms goes down to kind of the foundations of the terms. Where theism and atheism address a question of belief, Gnosticism and agnosticism address a question of knowledge. Knowledge is a subset of belief, and therefore agnosticism and Gnosticism could be subsets of theism and atheism, or more correctly, I guess, anti-theism. So one could be a Gnostic theist or an agnostic theist. In both cases they believe there is a God, but whether or not they claim to know, and we can quibble about the definition of knowledge, whether it requires absolute certainty or just a massive amount of certainty or whatever, they could be a Gnostic theist or an agnostic theist. And similarly, depending on your definitions of knowledge, I may or may not be an agnostic atheist or a Gnostic atheist, depending on sometimes I think I'm a Gnostic atheist if you get down to it, and I identify sometimes as a hard atheist or an anti-theist, that I actively believe the proposition that there are no gods, which is very different from I do not believe the proposition that there are gods. And because those terms aren't mutually exclusive, the one bit of confusion, if you take nothing else from me being here, agnosticism is not a middle ground between theism and atheism. It may be a middle position between theism and anti-theism, the belief that there is a God and the belief that there are no gods. But there is no middle position between I believe X and I do not believe X. I don't know if that's going to sink in. The gumball analogy that I used last night, there's a jar here full of gumballs. There's either an even number or an odd number. And you say that the number is even. Now, I can either believe that the number is even or not believe that the number is even. But if I don't believe the number is even, that does not believe that I believe it's odd. So there's no middle ground between I believe it's even and I don't believe it's even. There may be a middle ground between I believe it's even and I believe it's odd, but that's not agnosticism. And I don't know, hopefully that made sense. It's just not a middle ground. Sorry.
As we think about the philosophy of language, again, as I mentioned earlier, before time ran out, this is a very deep study. It's very profound. We take it for granted sometimes because the way we grow up learning language is through mimicry. And we know a bunch of different words and their associated meanings before we begin to give thought about where those words came from and how those associated meanings developed. But as we think about the very, very beginning, and we go back to the Bible, we have to have an objective reality that helps us to make sense of ourselves first, and then of everything else around us. And this begins with concepts. A few moments ago, I don't know if you picked it up, but I asked the question to the audience, what came first, a thought or a word? And Matt said, a thought. I'll save you the trouble. Well, that's very surprising, because if thought came first, then the question is, whose thought? And those thoughts lead to concepts. Those concepts are directly associated with what we call truth, and truth is the basis for reality. And so you have these concepts that come from the first mind or intelligence that creates us with mind and intelligence, where these thoughts can be reproduced. And then as these thoughts develop over time, we give names to them in certain cases, but in other cases, there are already thoughts given to us with names. For example, in the account of Genesis chapter 1 and 2, you see a general picture of the creation. In Genesis chapter 2, you see a specific picture of the creation, but there God is already communicating with Adam. And yet, we're not told of any specific system that God had given, but there, because the Bible is not designed to prove every little detail, we have to reason from what we have back to what we can know. And from all of that, we begin to understand that concepts are given to us first, and then we place names on these concepts. And as we place names on these concepts, then these names and these concepts will stay with us until such a time where there is a change. And this plays importantly into our understanding of how we interpret the Bible. You know, Matt brought up several times that he brought up a suspect notion about a God who used languages that would die, but that is exactly what needed to happen in order for God's word to remain true throughout the ages. If he used a language that lived, then the language itself would be susceptible to change, and therefore the concept would be susceptible to change. But because God chose to use dead languages, ancient Chaldean, which we call Biblical Hebrew, Aramaic, and Koine Greek, those are dead languages. Dialects still survive today, but the reason God chose to do that was so that the meanings could remain intact even throughout the ages. And if we understand why God chose Hebrew as opposed to every available language under the old system, then we're talking about the purpose of that language. When you look at that time and what God was trying to do with the Israelites, you understand that he was just introducing himself to the people as they were coming out of polytheism. In essence, God was attempting to lead these people by the hand, and so he chose a language conducive for word pictures and that showed a very personal side to himself. The Hebrew language is made up of only 600 root words. And from those 600 root words, which are 3 letters, and from those 3 letters you can build every other word in Hebrew. It's a very simple language, much like English, an SVO language, subject, verb, and object. But there he utilized that particular language because it painted pictures and it was a personal language. And God could utilize that particular language to accomplish his particular task. When you go over to the New Testament, the entire context changes. God's no longer trying to help people to understand some very profound concepts and showing them pictures, as it were. This is what we do with children as they're growing up. We begin with pictures before we give them words. In the New Testament, God now shifts the context, and now it's a series of arguments for God, for the church, for his Son, for the Holy Spirit, for truth. And so now he wants to give some very specific arguments. And what language does he choose to use? It's the common language of the man, but it's also Greek, because Greek is conducive for argument structures. Ever heard the phrase, "That's all Greek to me"? It's because the very nature of Greek, which is not an SVO language, it's a language that emphasizes word endings. God could utilize that language in such a way where he could construct arguments that would then ultimately prove his existence through a logical chain of reasoning. But to say that words have no meaning and that we don't know how we come up with meaning is to leave yourself open to many, many different possibilities and really no direction to go. This goes all the way back to wordsmiths such as Lewis Carroll and Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. You remember the famous portion there in those pieces of literature concerning Humpty Dumpty. And I can't forget, or I can't remember now the word. She said filibubber or something, jabberwocky or some nonsense. And it was Alice that was asking, well, what is the meaning of that word? And the response was, whatever I want it to mean. And if we live in a world where words are whatever we want it to mean, then anything is possible. But as we think about words, as we think about meaning, this is essential, if not paramount, to understanding God and to understanding why he gave us words, to understanding why the mind functions in the way that it does, to understand language. And what's interesting is if you do a study into history, what is the common denominator of civilization? It's not that there were just human beings that learned to develop themselves socially. Sociality is based upon communication. Communication comes through language. In a very real sense, everything begins and ends with language. As a matter of fact, when God chose to create the universe, what did he use? What tool did he use? And God said, let there be thus and so. Language is all throughout the Bible. It's the very basis of human existence. And so as we think about civilizations and how they arose, they had to have the ability to communicate. They had to have a system to exchange ideas, and that's what created reality, and that's what gave us civilizations. And when we figured out that we had to record our happenings for future generations, then language was transferred onto materials that could preserve this information for future generations. But language is all around us. As a matter of fact, even when we talk to ourselves, we're doing just that, talking to ourselves.
So, real quickly, I won't take too much time.
Once again, going back to Genesis. That's some of my favorite shit, yo. Like, what was the language? Because God was talking to Adam and Eve in the garden. So there was already a language directly from God, supposedly. What was that? How come we can't talk to God now? How come he don't talk to us now? And if God gave someone a message, and like they say, man, why are you going to give us a message, your almighty word, in a language that you know is going to die out over time? Still doesn't make any sense. He tried to explain that shit away, but that shit don't make no sense.
I agree. Language is critical. It was Brilligan, the Slave, Toast, Gary, Gimel, the Wave, etc. I'm not advocating that words can just mean whatever and still have value. You have to have this understanding in order to communicate. Your point about God needing to write in languages that die is interesting, because it admits my point. Your claim is that God needed to write in languages that die, so the meanings of those words or the usages of those words would stop changing, so we would have a reference point to go back and then look, which is an acknowledgement that the words themselves don't have an intrinsic meaning. They have a common usage, and we needed a point at which the change in that usage stopped in order to have a firm, fixed reference point. I'm fine with that. But it's an acknowledgement. My only contention was about whether or not words have meaning. They don't possess it intrinsically. We give them meaning, we have certain usages, and we can change that. But also, when we go back to look at the Bible, and while I'm certainly not the language expert that you are with biblical languages, I do know that there is a large amount of contention about what specific words mean, even among the experts, because these languages have died off and they're not in common usage. And so it's, what was that usage at the time that the author used it? This kind of, I'm gonna get the word wrong anyway, trying to figure out what the author meant and how that usage was. We have a better possibility if we know that a language stopped changing. But there are still many, many debates. I think you would agree that there's lots of debates about what these words mean. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the confusion we have.
And I don't think the contention was on that aspect that you brought up, that the intrinsic value of words and such. That was not the contention. I didn't dispute you on that, but I wanted to make sure that everybody understood that once we ascribe meaning to words, then so long as those words have that meaning, then we honor that meaning of that word, until we can show that within the context, a particular word is used in a different way. And that takes us into interpretation. I didn't have a lot of time to talk about interpretation, but there are systems of interpretation. We refer to it as hermeneutics, which is the science and art of interpretation. And this science and art is a system of how we interpret. That system is developed through scientific method, through observation and experimentation. But just a very crude illustration, who, what, when, where, why, and sometimes how, is a basic system of interpretation that we ask any text that we're reading. Who wrote this? Why did they write it? When did they write it? To whom did they write it? How did they write it? And here we have interpretation at its very basic level. And this is something that is true for all rational beings. Now, when we argue about the particular sense of a word, context always takes precedence, because context will help you to understand how a word is being used. And if we don't have the context, then we can make very quickly a text a pretext, and we can make it mean whatever we want it to mean. So usually words appear in context. Contextus is the Latin that means to weave together. And we have to understand how a word is used by not only the immediate context, but by the remote context. But once we honor all those rules, we can come to a very specific and definite meaning. And that's what we do with the Bible. We understand the hermeneutic. We apply an accurate exegesis. And then we consider the context, and we make sure that we understand and we compensate for the different uses of words. But once all that happens, you have what God wants you to have. I'm going to just summarize the question, but basically the question is asking, is it not God's responsibility to reveal himself before I, in general, can respond to him properly? Was that right? Through the Bible. As evidence, okay? Well, that's the very premise of the Bible itself. It's the fact that God is revealing himself. As we go back to history and we understand what happened in ancient times, and as these things are recorded and then preserved for posterity,
preserved in ancient times as it was recorded. And why did shit stop? Why did it stop? That's the whole thing. Like, why did the Bible stop? Why did all the miracles stop? Why did God stop interacting physically and directly in individuals' lives? Why isn't there some dude named whatever running up? God just gave me a message, yo. He said that in 3 weeks, there's going to be a major volcano eruption. We got to get everybody out. You know, and it's like, Or some dude be like, come home, be like, bro, fuck. I think I might be the new Moses. Huh? What are you talking about? Man, I would come home from work yesterday, and I heard a voice in my head. I walked in the woods, and I seen a burning fucking bush, bro. Word? The burning bush? You lying? Nah, bro. I think I'm the new Moses. But that shit don't happen. Why not? Why did all that stuff stop? That's what I want to know.
Today, in the 21st century, we can open this book, and this is not necessarily a historical book, it's not a scientific book, but it does deal with history. It does deal with science. It does deal with many other things. And as we look at this, we're going to see that there are certain arguments that are being made ultimately about God and why we should accept him. So that's the very purpose of the book. The very fact that we have this book is a demonstration that God is attempting to reveal himself. Now, I'm not certain if you're asking, must there be a personal experience? The Bible does not teach that we come to know God necessarily through a personal experience where God has to reveal himself through a miraculous means. He did that at one time under a different context, but now God reveals himself through his word. And God himself tells you why he has chosen to do that. And this was brought out in the last lecture before we entered into this discussion. Paul did not go by saying, I believe, nor did any of the other individuals. It had to happen through reason. God wants to reason with you. He's not going to appear to you as he once did, because he appeared to people for different purposes and different reasons. Those purposes and reasons no longer exist. Today, God understands that he needs information because we require information. The very thing that drives...
God knows, and see, today, God understands that we... How you know what God knows and what he understands? If you can't understand the mind of God, but you're trying to tell me what God understands. So you know how God thinks, huh? The audacity of some of these religious people. See, what God understands is... You about to talk for God right now. Who, you the fucking Pope? That's you the Pope. I didn't know you was the new Pope. Oh, you not the Pope? How the fuck you know what God thinks?
Human existence is curiosity, and curiosity yearns for information. And we are our happiest when we're learning. Have you ever stopped to think about how everything that we do in some shape or form is learning? And then those times that we're not learning, we're resting. But our minds, our brains are programmed to just receive information. And as we are driving down the street, we're just inputting information. And so God interjects his word in a system of information which is the information that is supposed to help us to reason from the known to the unknown, which is God.
Is there time for me to touch on that?
Yeah, you go ahead.
I'll try and keep it short because I'm sure you're all sick of me now, or maybe both of us, who knows? And it's hot. So if I have a history book and it makes 83 claims and I verify that 80 of them are correct, that doesn't tell me anything at all about whether the other 3 are correct, even if they're all mundane claims. It tells me that the source may be somewhat reliable, but I can't actually verify those other 3 claims. And if in fact the 80 that we verified are rather mundane claims, and the 3...
All right. How many of y'all still believe in the Bible? What's in here with D1? Y'all still go to church and believe in the Bible? I ain't gonna criticize you if you do. I ain't gonna talk shit or nothing. I just want to know. I'm trying to add up some statistics here. 1 out of every 5 art and education viewers still lives by a religious doctrine. You know, I'm doing this for my own studies.
we haven't verified are extraordinary claims, well, then we're even more of a pickle. Now, what he just talked about was that God doesn't reveal himself in this particular way to people anymore. Church of Christ, as I understand it, is miracles don't happen anymore. There was a time and a place and a reason for that, and that the reasons no longer exist.
Yeah, I don't get it. Why don't the reasons exist for miracles anymore?
I don't want to don a Southern Baptist hat or anything. I'll just stay an atheist. I disagree. I think the reasons for that do still exist. The reasons for those demonstrations, from my perspective, is that sort of demonstration gives a firm empirical footing to allow us to have a reasoned belief. That need still exists because absent that empirical demonstration, we are being asked to consider these other people's accounts trustworthy. And if they were just accounts of this happened, I'd say, okay, no big deal. But they're not just accounts of mundane events. These are the extraordinary claims that require extraordinary evidence. And I would argue, though it may offend people, that any God who thinks that they have a time period with a certain select group of people under which they need to establish firm empirical foundations for reasoned belief, and that time ends and everybody who comes after that is now forced to rely on hearsay, doesn't understand the nature of evidence, reason, and the burden of proof.
I just want to say something real quick. Seeing something does not necessarily mean that you're going to believe it. We have account upon account, and this was brought up in the last lecture. People in the Bible saw God, they heard God, and still rebelled against him. Still questioned whether he existed. It has nothing to do with empirical evidence per se. It has everything.
Yeah, Moses even... What the fuck was that? Like something just flew against my leg. Oh shit, like something brushed up against me. I got a ghost cat in here, guys. I got a ghost cat. That was, Probably my imagination. Hope this ghost cat don't come back. What the fuck? Shit, I forgot what the fuck I was about to say now. Was that God? Oh shit, God just sent me a sign. All right, I'm coming, guys.
Mumbling, you better kill me, sweating bottles, thinking how could this be? Sirens ringing out the window, down the vibe, breathtaking like views from the truth. Never thought I'd end up like this. Couldn't murder in my sleep. See you running like shooting your guns. I feel like I could just shoot it. Oh, wow, survive the last 2 rounds, crowded to gas. There's no way of thinking, coming together to the new. All that bullshit, I'm fucking normal. Actions arresting you with the recipe. I ain't going crazy, got me fucking restless. I who the fuck is the decent? I can't follow them hoes, ayy. But them standards, I can't follow them hoes, ayy. But them standards, I can't follow them hoes, ayy. But them standards, I can't follow them hoes. Never been one with the crowd, not standing around with my palm to the sky. Smoking so much, keep my head in the sky. Misery chasing, just lace on my back. Blade in my pocket, reliable facts. Stay on the dolo, but you can see that. Underdog counted up, mounted up, settled and never that leveled up. Have no got tight and will clear in this alphabet. Stay off the radar, got moves like I'm rated for rain. Not really been brought in the process. Can't fuck with the guns in my fingers. Start itching, let back in detention. One calling this lady. Rechanging tradition, show up with katana. That bitch with the llama. She clean you like commonly. Blood in your comments. Can't get with the nonsense. Smoke weed to keep level. I really get even. Forget what that's meaning. I change it with the seasons. It's fall, so I'm back with the shotty. My swagger too hotty, but bucket back gloves. When I get on the mission, I give her dismissive. My focus on lazy, get nasty like braces. Upon it, you feel it, you menace. I did it, it left me on twisted, it put me on game. Mentally broken and physically stained. Knuckles not swollen, got guts on my hands. Done with the losses and left me on jaded. This ultimate goal got me back to what made it. Reacting before, man, I'm back and I'm slow. Mosaic approach when I'm writing this cadence. Bro, lived it before, but I'm really a Cajun. Hey, fuck on them standards, can't follow them hoes. 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 Fuck on them standards, can't follow them. Fuck on them standards, can't follow them. Fuck on them standards, can't follow them hoes. Fuck on them standards, can't follow them hoes. Fuck on them standards, can't follow them. Fuck on them standards, can't follow them hoes. Fuck on them standards, can't follow them. Fuck on them standards, can't follow them hoes. Fuck on them standards, can't follow them. Fuck on them standards, can't follow them hoes. Fuck on them standards, can't follow them. Came over now and they used to the crease, increasing my legion. Let's call it prestige. 84 in the not deserve.
Bitch, you better run. Yo, that's my fucking shit, son. Yeah, bitch was so ugly, I really put a bag on her.
Draw no attention, they fucking with that. Rock on my shoe, man, feeling like that. Never been able with that, but my step. Follow, I'm not sure, feeling like that. King on the money, but never let go. Niggas be talking, but that's how I go. When niggas talking, the front on the boat. Niggas be sweating, they hard as so cold. Up at the end, I love to be sick. Up in my feet, but that's always my shot. For fucking them here, was looking at that. That nigga was good. Niggas they rolling, they popping no money. Rappers keep burning, like fucking too bad. Rock at your feelings, they quit with the bitch. They been the case, so nigga get lit. They got it shooting my niggas, the bullet get lit. They nigga, but that nigga spit. Bodies get hard, they ain't speaking no sanity. I let you know, you're not a friend of me. I got a bumper that really can feel it. Bitch, I'm a god, it's nothing to feel it. Give me receipt, I'm back with a bitch. That message, ain't got that nigga. Never keep spinning when I'm at that spinning. I make a race, ain't looking to finish. How am I niggas in 30 minutes? You pushing these lips, script up in the get it. It didn't even balance, so fuck out of yapping. Me never tapping, that's I'm in the plastic. It give me you practice. Let it bleed, yeah. Turn on my collar, cause this is my collar. Turn on the voice, they got my baller. Lost the melody, jumpers keep falling. Round in the head, my number they call it. I see how they try, these numbers keep rolling. This nigga running, I feel it, they go away, erasing my body, no longer so slow. When they carry my pistol, I think I'm the chosen. The title of funeral, always on edge. Freaking out, push me, is word of the story. Let it bleed, yeah. Let it bleed, yeah. Let it bleed, yeah. But it was shooting that legs, seeing that talking and stuff. Police that jumped up the clock, now I just rise up the clock. Now they go give me the pop, cause it was never a problem. You wanna be shooting that legs, seeing that talking and stuff. Police that jumped up the clock, now I just rise up that clock. Now they go give me that pop, cause it was never a problem. Hey, police that jumped up the clock, now I just rise up that clock. Now they go give me the pop, cause it was never a problem. Money and all they front of prescription when they're in anxiety, fucking prescribe these pills. So I'm feeling up and you think that you crazy, I think that you bluffing. My mental unstable, I'm making the busting. These voices they tell me that they feel like nothing. Big to the back, that feeling so scrunchy, thinking you niggas is 2011. Basically niggas don't want this pressure. You never gon' catch it, okay for your preaching. It's feeling my season, I feel when they play me quick for you niggas with logic and reason. You call me niggas. So rest my joy, leaving no straight to the point. I can fuck with no weekends and that's the weekend. My business, all that's official, bro, what the fuck? Rolling with stuff, you know you want to see it unless you gon' pop. Promise my nigga, this shit ain't no problem. Never been scary, this shit ain't no problem. Niggas so scary, that man at your block. But when I live, got that leg on the block. Talking with slick, get your family up. You niggas are sick, get your energy up. This back for the people, your baby, this people with basic that regal. This back for the rooms, what's ever like eagle. Your ego mislead you. Where they go, some guys go jump off a bridge. I bet you go fly just like a turtle, not built for this life. My side just go God, ain't no fear in these eyes. That's what happens. I'm going to supply. Take a week off, man. Shit like a vibe. Got the big brain with the sack on my way. And the shock in your face. Fuck out my face. I've been hitting you too. Sit out of place. Got the shooter was sleeping. Thought it was safe. But I told you it's sleeping. Fresh out the safe. No pilot procedure. Nobody safe. No busting no people. BRC. You're beating. You're lazy. You're crazy. You're busy. You're missing my set. They got shit when you said that you killed me. I died. Dramatically dropping my ocean on top. Don't get like this. I'm just so proud on the coffin. I'm back on my shit and I'll never be off it. I'm proud of myself. So back to the finish, we rapping again, it's I'm starting the tennis. I'm one of the realest, so stupid, you waited above me and said, you're all in your neighbor. You looking for chicken, you said it, no catching, no problem. My hair got the bottom, and you wanna talk it. And a bit hungry, she tired of the talking. You see, I'm not rough, my shit ain't no play. You play what you play at. Be dead in your face, now your bitch looking flashy. She trying to get earthy, I give it a go. Never the earthy, the fuck is a mercy. The fuck is a mercy, the fuck is a mercy. I'm more than a sort of talk about that, but I'm leaving school early, been tired of these bad instructions so high. So I sleep on my hammer, can't fuck with these niggas. I'm better Wakanda, you stupid little niggas, you smell the cigar. Balance a nigga, I keep on evolving, throw shit on my name, we gon' see if it's awesome. Time is the last, this shit was a call to come out left field when they thought it was finished. like fucking thought. Brain cells past it, got me feeling fucking more. Middle finger to the law. I ain't with the action shit. Get your hands chopped off, feeling like a jigsaw. In the maze, but you thought this was a phase. Now it's all up in your face. You can see it in my face. I don't have a lot of buzz, man. I swear the jig is up. In the bank, I set it up. Brothers told me get it all. Fuck a feeling, got a ball. Get a check, fuck a bitch unless you fit. Touch the door, this nigga said. Keep it safe from paranoid. Trust a nigga that's in there. Body with the strap. Keep the peace, it ain't no best unless you talking out your neck. Ain't no time for this and that. Get you stacked up like an egg, cause you work the hardest kid. Don't you have me figured out? We ain't got the same objectives. Let it die, let it rip. Keep it high, never stress. For a life, less shit. Conversations sounded different, cause I got a different rip. Quarter grip of what I've been. Unleashed, fuck your whip. Now I'm living with a sip. I'm chillin', it's the feeling. Trying to tell you how we cut the on the cup. On some shit that can't be tracked. Got the phone to my left when I'm sitting in the crib. Fool me once, that's okay. Fool me twice, get the spray. Fool me twice, fade away. What do I care about? Clearly it's nothing. 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 Pay the price a separate way, calculating every step. Had a word about my vision, I don't mind catching hell. Bring the static if you want it, less side, feeling haunted. Bring the drama, bad and fun. Who the hell is it? Jerry trying to ice me, shit is funny. Out the simple way of thinking, had to deal with all my demons. Had me caught up in what happened, standing burning out my iris. Gotta get it how I live. Living thoughts got me far on God. Never care what they thought, pacified by the pen. Let me feeling crucified. Now I beat, now they both got them looking petrified. Can't say I did try, relapse, lost some time. What a time, I'm alive, what's the time? Too bad, roll a J, till my crown, simmer down. Hit a J, hit a J, take a break, more thrills, let's chill, fuck fake dismay. What do I care about? Clearly it's nothing. What do I care about? Clearly it's nothing. What do I care about? Clearly it's nothing.
Think I give a fuck about that shit, buddy. Hey, 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 hey.
Another motherfucker smoking till I'm feeling nothing. Ask me if I'm still coming home. Motherfucking no, gave a fucking shit to happen, but it really shouldn't matter. Let me feel it, kinda make me roll. Never thought I'd be this crazy. Got my demons contemplating, scratching till it's time to win. When I die, contemplation, I don't motherfucking know. Keep that circle text fuck, really just a fucking soul. If you really ever know. $50 fabrication, radiating every case. Saying simple, bro. Gotta get it. Fucking feeling all these questions I don't hear. Got my vision getting clear. Slow it down so you can hear it. Get too close so you can feel it. Minutes to the number 7, jumping borders like I'm grabbing up and never standing. Cause a panic, perfect candy, catch that shit up in a minute, should've seen a minute, pay my car like I was camping, gotta hit me by the stands, even though it never met a different nigga, better shut us like been coded in.
Who calling me interrupting my goddamn motherfucking what? Alright, who in that? Who? Hello? Hey, Lena, what's up?
Happy birthday.
Thank you. What you doing?
We're at to go to the pool.
I'm going to the pool. Oh, swimming. It's hot outside down there?
What'd you say?
It's hot outside down there?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it ain't that hot up here. I don't know. It might be hot enough to go swimming now. It's been so cold and chilly still. Where you going? Huh?
Cold down there.
It was the other night. It got chilly again. Who you going to the pool with?
We're going to my auntie's friend's house.
Okay. Where your brother at?
Like what?
Where Desmond at?
Here at Johnport.
Oh, he already went?
Yes, sir.
Oh, wow. I didn't think he left yet. Hey, Lena, I thank you for calling me for my birthday, but I'm on YouTube Live right now. Let me get back to doing my painting, okay?
Okay.
All right, talk to you later on. I love you.
Love you too.
Bye.
Pictures to my brothers got me back when I was hauling. Hey, and we hear shit kicking much love, but they know a little different than before. Yeah, all these listen stuff, they really motherfucking paying off, but they killing every motherfucking song. Yeah, hey. Bitch, you better run, 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 yeah. Run, 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 oh yeah, bitch, you better run, 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 yeah. Run, 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 run. You don't want smoke, you don't want smoke. Yo bitch a thot, yo bitch a hoe. She suck my dick, she get me dope. She fucking squad, she for my bros. Talk about me, they let it go. My little shorty, she work on the pole. You a little bitch, you get exposed. You a little stitch, you get exposed. Hey, I just want to give me a M and fuck a little bitch in the front. Hey, I used to push a bug and now I roll up in the Benz. Talk about me in the clique and it don't make no fucking sense. Tryna rob me in this bitch and you gon' meet your fucking end. Hey, hey, don't make me mad in this bitch. Really, boy, don't make me mad in this bitch. The bitch was so ugly, the bitch was so ugly, I really had to put a bag on a bitch. Hey, ha, really put a bag on a bitch. Talk about me and bitch, you better run, 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 yeah. Run, 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 oh yeah, bitch, you better run, 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 yeah. Run, 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 run. Hey, track after track, this movie gets scary. Talking too reckless, this Luga play petty. Coded and done it, just call me the stratus. Listen, I'm talking, it's really no effort. Sound like the mob, I can't do it no better. Can't dance in the back, I ain't Kevin Better. More like beheaded, precision, be butchered and catchy like cushion. You question, how could you? You sloppy like Trump, you faking, you dumb, Olympic, keep running. It's simple, we dumping your mind, you get crumble. But then I mumble, I probably just stumble. My speech be on bumble, but really be jumble. My clip be on jumbo. Serial pictures be flashing. Aerial mood on the Monday. Give me a sound like I'm dinner. Smoking on sense, so can print it. No, you can't hit this composite. No, you can't stop me regardless. Lately been trusting the process. Come up and looking like awesome. Bailey can't fuck with the nonsense. Cleaning some shit off my conscience. I'm on this bitch like I'm brand. Quitting some shit when I'm dead. Bitch, you better run, 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 yeah. Run, 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 oh yeah, bitch, you better run, 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 yeah. Run, 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 run. Bitch, you better run, let's go at the funny. I'll show you the dog, it's a part of me, sonny. Thought about quitting, but knew I was tripping. I'll turn to the coldest, I'm one in the billions. Apply all the fire, smoke the addition. Never gon' turn down my heat. Both that I fade on some instant transmission. And bitch, I am up, cause that's worth to my ceiling. Ay, run, 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 like you ain't got no sense. Y'all run, 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 like I called the bomb friend. I ain't the pieces that finish the puzzle. Two step in the one, cause I won't ever crumble. Popping the ass on my step, got a stunner like Perkins, where you could get hit with the upper. Moving up high as a planet. Shit on your look like you body the mantis. You know who the man is, now look at the camera. Yes, it's okay, you could panic. Keep it, I'm rushing, insomnia stunning. Gas in my blood till it give me concussion. Changing my name to that nigga, but back to the topic. You better start running. You better run, 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 yeah. Run, 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 oh yeah, bitch, you better run, 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 yeah. Run, 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 run.
Y'all don't know about that. That's the jam. Y'all ain't know that was the jam. That's the super fly. Okie dokie. Yeah.
that shit didn't face. Fuck, I was out of it. Who is that? Who is he? Man, this one reverence me. Check my pedigree. Like he won't test me. Watch how I levitate. Talking and levitate. Copperfield. Hurry, I love touch your feeling. With Silent Hill goes for a minute. These boys about chilling, but fucking get with it. It's such shit like, how did I know? But man, he's so shitty. Like, how did he blow? I thought he was gone. Sorry, I never eat motorcar jobs. Now I'm on king of the hill. Say less cause I finally got out the pill. Deep down in these feelings. But can't live without. I'm trying to be crazy and laughing myself. Living for in this back for my help. Reacting to bullshit and nothing that pages don't make me a bit. Embracing Itachi. Yo, we was some honest and feeling like yo. And it's a fool, so let's bring out the flow. Still got the phone cause they acting a fool. Accuracy messy, you know it's a goal. I swear to be mad, I need me some food. No one that loves it, that shit for the school. This shit ever left us. I'm running and doing it. I'm going to used to me, nigga. No stop till I get what I want. Ain't you forever, don't give me your thoughts. Walk or whatever, get clean if you want. Ain't you forever, don't give me your thoughts. Walk or whatever, get clean if you want. Ain't you forever, don't give me your thoughts. Hey. Ain't you forever, don't give me your thoughts. Walk or whatever, get clean if you want. Ain't you forever, don't give me your thoughts. Walk or whatever, get clean if you want. Ain't you forever, don't give me your thoughts. Walk or whatever, get clean if you want. Ain't you forever, don't give me your thoughts. Walk or whatever, get clean if you want. But that sentimental breaking burn this bitch up to it's nothing. Burn that bitch up to it's nothing. Pop my pillow till I get the fuck up out my feelings. But they let me kinda dead. I ain't had no fucking feelings. Could've feel my situation. So I put my demonstration. Let me put the feeling crazy. Feeling crazy. Years later, all my feelings contemplative. Like what happened very hazy. Lost a lot of fucking people. When the record speculation, man, they hate it wasn't clear. Now I get it from a pill. Shouldn't have broke the fucking seal, but you probably won't hit it. And that's really fucking fine. Separation like you treated, got you acting like a mime. So I'm finished with the time. Gotta get this fucking bag. Boy, I end up in the bag with a fucking toe tag. I ain't with that fucking movie, check the baby for these days. Rolled up another, hold up, get bustin', fucking this blood. I'm feeling nothing, I'm feeling nothing, I'm feeling nothing, I'm feeling nothing. Rolled up another, hold up, get bustin', fucking this blood. I'm feeling nothing, I'm feeling nothing, I'm feeling nothing, I'm feeling nothing. Now I'm focused on the games, got me feeling kinda even. Told you niggas it was legal, Danny Glover. Always been a different nigga, I ain't with the same shit. Always on a different move, I ain't with the lame shit. I ain't got shit to prove, never worry about the next time. My life been kinda crazy, call me loving out again. I ain't ready for the dirt, I ain't fucking with the hearse. My life been a curse. Drove too much repetition, had to break the fucking cycle. Even though it was too late, fuck fate. But I gotta keep it moving before I really fucking lose it. Lose life, had me rolling up a loose. I don't even do the sins that I can't fucking lie. Messing with the devil, had me clinging to the past. Savage in my mental, got me thinking life a trash. Standing in the middle, thinking what the fuck it was. Rolled up another, hold up, can't function. Fucking this blunt, I'm feeling nothing. Rolled up another, hold up, can't function. Fucking this blunt, I'm feeling. Rolled up another, hold up, can't function. Fucking this blunt, I'm feeling. Rolled up another, hold up, can't function. Fucking this blunt, I'm feeling, I'm feeling, I'm feeling, I'm feeling, I'm feeling. Walk around looking serious, you out there with blood fury. You second guessing, I'm done with it. With this ain't no coming back. Sorry, nigga, no running back. Now we ain't no heart attack. Now we see where your heart is at. You that bitch like I'm quarter, got fucking bitch like I'm buzzing. Keep a bitch like I'm mad. Case it comes to that damage. Hey, you touch it like Rosie. See my silence and rising. Keep my shit like 1,000. Contemplation and welcome. On the move like the red. Gave a fuck what they call it. I kept below in the chamber. Niggas told me that bitch. I told them it never matter. I gotta get it regardless. Beat it up in the budget. I told my niggas no budget. Brought the nigga to what's that? My niggas shot on the hammer. They put it with it like hammer. Got me feeling like Tiller. I think I fucking feel it. Or shit with a feeling. This ain't a sketchy movie. Blood all over my face. Cause you niggas know it. If you see it, you got a blessing enough for the fucking bitch. And I gotta get to the kitchen. Flip these verses like house. I ain't selling no down. On my wrist like a rifle. I ain't doing no time. Man, these niggas too fake. Standing in my design. Gotta get with a work. Can't stop it, that's fine. Eat it while you talk. Busy talking on mine. Man, we done with the question. Let me hit you with seven. Always thought it'd be simple until we got to this level. And then they saying my name. Got me grabbing my shovel. I'm loading up 7 heaven. Watch I'm on devastation. Watch you in my presentation. Get bloody with niggas fake. Too risky, don't fuck with baby. Too risky, don't fuck with baby. Beats from the east and I don't come in peace. Bring it soul to the feast. Ain't no place for the weak. Beats from the east and I don't come in peace. Bring it soul to the feast. Ain't no place for the weak. Beats from the east and I don't come in peace. Bring it soul to the feast. Ain't no place for the weak. Beats from the east and I don't come in peace. Bring it soul to the feast. Ain't no place for the weak. Say your press for you walk out the crib when I whip out the blade and the cage of his wrist. I'm the stealer. I hope it don't shorty go choke in the back of the whip, in the back of a throat. Absolutely the coldest, the bumps are the highest. So smoking the finest, backwards ignited. This wolf is my diet. Just call me Lil Riot. Too late for apologies. Watch how you speak to a god. Voices whisper to me, asking all these questions. All I feel is tension. Squeeze your melon like a lemon. No, I ain't shit. I probably blow your speakers. I probably blow your brain while I chill with Mary. See, I gotta fucking go and just get it. This is the shit you remember. If you used to sleep on the seven, and when the bodies get dropping, there ain't no room for the loaf, and there ain't no room for the stopping. Because I'm going like only did it. Think I can call it, but shit keep changing and changing. But I ain't coming for closure. I can't tell you it's over. Feel it struggle and grind. Feel it struggle and mind. We're not here for the friendly. Just know that seven get deadly. Beast from the east, and I don't come in peace. Bring your soul to the feast. You get called for the free. Beast from the east, and I don't come in peace. Bring your soul to the feast. You get called for the free. Beast from the east, and I don't come in peace. Bring your soul to the feast. You get froze for the free. Beast from the east, and I don't come in peace. Bring your soul to the feast. You get froze for the free.
Peace from the east, and I don't come in peace. Bring your soul to the feast. You can froze for the free. What? Oh my God, the boy just rapping. So many birthday wishes. Jesus. Right.
at the same time it takes you to get here?
All right, I'll be there in a minute.
Alright. Alright, bro.
All right, I gotta run. There's nobody even watching. All right, I'm out of here. Ugh.